Well, Mary Rodwell is recognised internationally as one of the leading researchers and writers in the UFO and contact phenomenon areas. She's the founder and principal of Australian Close Encounter Resource Network, more commonly known as ACERN, and she joins us now. Hello, Mary.
Hello, Dean. Nice to speak with you again.
Yep, and ditto. You've been pretty busy since we last spoke, and you have a seminar coming up on the 11th of July, just 3 days from when we're recording this interview, called Our Alien Ancestry, What Comes Next? So can you give us some information on that firstly?
Yes, well, the great thing is it's looking at what the Indigenous Australians are saying about what's happening now. And there's a prophecy to say that something very major is going to happen at the end of this year. And they call it the magic box. It's supposedly some kind of technology that was left by the Pleiadians. And that's going to be, they say, activated at the end of the year because they're talking about some kind of shift on this planet that is happening and is going to continue to happen. And so being part of that, Stephen and Even Strong are both archaeologists that are very much tied into the Indigenous of Australia, and they're getting a lot of information from them as well. But we've also got Lee Capitelli, who's an experiencer, who's in my book, The New Human. And we've also got Barry Eaton, who talks about the afterlife and what have you. And myself is about where we're going with what I call the new upgrades of human that are really now, as far as this is the global phenomenon. You know, when you were talking yourself, Dean, about how many people are interested, you've been amazed at how many people are interested in this whole phenomena. What I'm realizing is that it's because it's a lot more global than people realize. And we're not just talking about millions here now. I believe that the whole planet is in some way being activated on some level to wake up to more of who and what we are.
And I've always had a suspicion that the Australian Indigenous community are central to the whole UFO phenomenon. Correct me if I'm wrong, I believe they are the oldest race on the planet.
Well, that's what seems to be coming through. And Stephen Even Strong, amazing father and son who have been fortunate to build trust with the Indigenous. And they're saying we've had the history of pharaohs and Egyptians visiting this Australia, that some of the gold in Tutankhamun apparently came from here in Queensland. They're able to find out where gold actually originally comes from. And that's just one of the things that the pharaohs and the Egyptians came here to get information from the Indigenous peoples of Australia. So absolutely. So it's a whole new history they're talking about. And they've gone into it in amazing depth. So it's a must-see for anyone really wanting to know more of the origins of who we are from that perspective.
You mentioned the Pleiadians, so that is really interesting.
Well, what was interesting was that Stephen and Even both said that they were amazed that the Indigenous peoples were actually admitting that this was part of their prophecy. And as I say, they called it the magic box, which seems to be they're saying some kind of technology that was left by the Pleiadians. So anyone who's interested in that will find this fascinating. And all of us, with Lee, she's what we call one of the upgrades, and she's going to talk about what it's like to be one of the more aware humans and what she understands about her role on this planet as well. And I've mentioned Lee a number of times in my presentation. So I think people will find it a really interesting collection of data that we need right now, because I was joking with you, I think, Dean, prior to our interview, about this is a bit like a very bad B-grade movie that's going on at the moment on this. So we need to perhaps have something that will lift spirits, and apart from having a good sense of humor, which I think is vital at this time.
Well, I've often joked, being 2020, if disclosure was ever going to happen, it's going to happen this year.
Yeah.
But it's an amazing year. So what comes next? Is this also tied into the Indigenous people of Australia, what you were just describing to us, or is this what comes next overall?
this what we're talking about, what comes next overall. We know the indigenous peoples right across the planet, all of them have talked about being connected to the star visitors and what have you over the centuries, that's our ancestors, etc., etc. But what comes next is part of what that's happening with this prophecy. But not only that, what we're seeing ourselves in terms of the what we call this waking up of humanity. And although it's been very hard for people to be stuck indoors and having all these very draconian mandates, what it has done is got people thinking, because they've stopped off the treadmill for a while and they're starting to look at what's going on and questioning. And that's needed to happen, because I think they've kept us so busy that we haven't given ourselves time to see what's actually happening. And those that we're supposed to see as good governance of our world are in fact showing very much lead feet. And I think this is part of what we need to see so that we can make changes.
So in your research and your work, who do you think we really are? Are we ancestors of the Pleiadians?
Well, I believe from my research, and this is working with some molecular biologists and geneticists, and the information that I've been given by whistleblowers, is that we are a combination of a number of what we call star ancestors. And so there's a mix of those from Sirius, Arcturus, Pleiadians, etc., etc. And it seems to be one of the interesting things that experiencers have been saying to me is that they feel they're a hybrid. And as they start to wake up and have more of a sense of their communication with these intelligences, they realize that certain origins fit for them or resonate with them. And they may say, do you know, I feel very connected to the Pleiadians, or I feel very connected to Sirius, or even another, some are saying, some of the children are talking about coming from other dimensions as well. So what's happening is, as we are waking up to more of our, and they're calling it DNA activation. Everyone's talking about that now, is that these frequencies that are hitting the planet, plus the new kids coming in, are bringing the frequencies that are activating the dormant DNA, the DNA that we have from these species. And, Command Sergeant Robert Dean, who died only a short time ago, who was one of those that was in the military, found out about cosmic top secret, only admitted a couple of years before he died that he'd been taken up on board craft and had a number of weeks there, said that he'd been shown at least 12 different species have in fact been involved in the human genome. So if we're talking about 12, we've got quite a few others to wake up to, if that's the case. But that's what he was saying. And I have a lot of respect for Bob Dean. Many see him as the grandfather of ufology, but he only recently, as in his last few years, admitted he was an experiencer and that he'd been on the craft. And one of the things he did say was that they showed him our future, and our future, once we got over the difficulties that we're going through now, the dark night of Earth, he said, what we will see in the future is incredible. It will be really amazing and beautiful. So I hung on to that, because he was one of these people that came from his heart, was telling, had absolute integrity in what he was saying. And I'm hearing this from the children. I only spoke about 5 or 6 weeks ago to a 10-year-old in Australia, who, the reason I'd come across him was his father said, my son gets visited by light beings. And when I spoke to the 10-year-old, he told me he was visited by light beings and came from a planet of light. And he said that he would manifest instantly on that planet. He said, Earth, it's a bit of a game. He said, it's harder to manifest down here. It was what he said to me. And I said, what do you think of what's happening now on this planet? And he quite spontaneously said, Mary, this is the reset.
Right.
And that was how he explained it. And I thought that was quite fascinating, given how many people are talking about the reset. that's going on now, that he'd come out with that as a 10-year-old.